Hello and welcome. We are starting module 8 today. In module 8 we will continue with second language acquisition. In module 7 also we did the same. So, in module 7 we have looked at various aspects of second language acquisition, and we ended that module, completed that module with the psychological and cognitive aspects of second language acquisition. In this module we will go ahead with some other variables, other important aspects of SLA. So, we will start with the social aspects of second language acquisition, following with the other kinds. So, various kinds of language acquisition that are connected, similar to SLA, but not quite so. So, we will discuss about the social versus tutored SLA, we will talk about the L2 versus foreign language acquisition in short. Then lecture 2 will talk about childhood bilingualism. Within that we will look at the simultaneous bilingualism in lecture 2. Lecture 3 of course, we will look at, we will continue with childhood SLA, but in lecture 3 the focus will be on the successive bilingualism. Lecture 4 will take up adult SLA with respect to various important variables through which this phenomena had been studied. And last lecture 5 of this module, we will look at some new domains within the broader second language acquisition research area. So, for example, in the initial stages we looked at in the previous module how initial stages language acquisition had a particular perspective to look at, and over the period of time with the advent of new theoretical positions, newer kind of probes and so on, the research questions have changed over time. So, the last lecture will try to give you a glimpse of where we stand today. Of course, SLA itself is a very important domain of research, but there are many other connected domains that have also come up in recent times. So, we will look at those in short. So, let us start with the first lecture today, social aspects of SLA. Now, in the previous module we have seen the psychological and the neural connection in terms of the functional localization, in terms of the processing and so on. Now, we will look at the social aspects. Now, social aspects in fact is the one that had been studied even in the past. So, it is not a new domain, it is actually the one that has been studied the most. So, social domain, because any language for that matter, not just for second language acquisition, any language is a social reality. Languages are spoken in a society, it follows certain social norms, it embodies the cultural cognitive ideas and so on. So, it is very important to understand the social background within which a second language is also learned. So, when we look at the social variable, we will divide them into two interconnected factors, macro social factors and the micro social factors. So, macro and micro, as the name suggests, are the broader questions and the more subtle aspects of the same society. So, society works as an organization of some sort, and within that you have, because of the bigger social factor, there are some smaller, minute, subtle aspects of language that also changes. So, these two factors we will be discussing one by one, and we will also see that how they are interconnected. So, major parts of social angle typically include the socio-political background, the larger social background. So, what kind of society it is, what kind of political background do we have, the hierarchy of the languages L1 and L2, or if there are multiple languages, how do the interrelationship between all the languages, all those languages work out, and of course, consequently depending on the relationship of the languages, the how do you see it happening, how do you see it translating in real life, it will translate itself through the speakers of those languages. So, as a result of which you will see different kinds of attitudes towards language 1, language 2, language 3 and so on. So, these are the broader questions, and the subtle and seemingly minor aspects may include the variation of L2 in the given environment, because we have just talked about the major macro social factors. which might be depending on the scenario, there might be different kinds of interrelationship with L1 and L2 and so on. So, within that L2 might have different kinds of variations, and then formal and informal conversation setup, conversation rule in a given society, these are typically the so called minor or subtle aspects which the learner has to learn. So, the micro and macro factors often interact with each other, and hence they should be studied as such. So, let us look at the macro social aspects first. The major factors, there are of course many, there might be many more, and some of them might be relevant for more relevant for one society as opposed to another and so on, but largely when we talk about macro social factors, these are the few that we typically talk about. So, the status of L1 and L2, identities, institutional forces and social categories. Status of L1 and L2 are this is one of the most important factors, because this decides how the L2 learning will play out in the real world. So, this relationship depends on various factors. It could be the language policy, it could be the historical factors and so on. So, for example, in the US the English language is the national language, and this is the recognized language, and as a result of which everybody is expected to learn the language. And not only that, it is not just because it is there, but because it is important for everything there. So, your citizenship, your participation in the democratic processes and so on, nothing can happen if you do not speak the language. So, as a result of which the inability, somebody is not able to learn that language, let us say migrant, any kind of a migrant group, if they do not learn to speak their language, that might result into a different kind of, most of the time it is negative attitude will be there, unfavorable attitude will be there. So, this is something like this is mandatory. In such a situation, the relationship between L1 and L2 is of one particular kind. Here for the migrants, L2 will be English, and the language needs to be learned under any circumstances, if you want to be considered as part of the host group, as part of the host culture. On the other hand, not all countries are so simplistic. There might be some countries have multilingual language policy, where there are more than one official language. For example, our own country, India is a very good example. In this case, we have a multilingual language policy in place, where each of the states has an official language. Some states actually have more than one official language. So, not only English is there, English is one of the official languages at both state and national level, but also each state has its own. And then depending on the scenario over a period of time, some states have actually incorporated more than one language. So, as a result of which there are a large number of languages that are there on the platter, so to say. So, it is imperative for those speakers to learn the state official language for all the residents of the state. So, not only for the for various kinds of formal purposes, education, job and other things. So, state official language as well as the national central official language, they have to learn that. Now, it might get a little complicated, because sometimes a state official language is the highest language in a particular state, but the same language in another state might be a minority language. So, there are all these different kinds of complexities that are part of multilingual societies. As a result of which there might also be an issue of linguistic chauvinism as in the latent attitude towards one language or the other. So, one group has a either positive or negative. So, positive towards one's own language, which often has another side which is negative attitude to another language. This often plays out in not so savory manner. So, these are all complexities in the larger domain with respect to L1 and L2. So, what is L1 in, let us say in one state might be L2 in another, and then all the resultant problems. Language of power also refers to the language of opportunity. So, which language is more powerful often translates into which language gives you more opportunity in life, opportunity for education, for job and so on and so forth. For example, English language globally is a language of opportunity. at least so far. So, language if you know English, you can migrate to a number, all those 5 countries that are part of the the network. So, US, UK, Australia, Canada. So, all of these languages, all of these countries have English as an official language. So, this is the language of power in many in whichever way you look at it. Now, this leads to what a very motivated and a positive and motivated approach towards English as L2. Similarly, for many other languages in many other foreign languages in India. So, this is the one reason why L2 is learnt or should be learnt often is because it offers you some benefit or it is forced upon you. So, forced upon you when it is an official language of the state, benefit because it gives you education and access to education, access to job. Historical factors are also very important to decide which language will dominate on which other language. So, dominance often is historically decided. So, this leads to social, political and cultural dominance. Dominance does not just mean this language has to be learned. What does it mean? It means that at the social level, political level and cultural level also the dominance translates. So, as a result of which the entire social scenario is such that you will be encouraged to learn that particular language. So, these are generally reflected through interrelation between the communities speaking those languages. How does it translate? Through mutual attitude and permeability among the groups. Permeability as in if there is a flexible fluid relationship between the groups. So, are you allowed to mingle with the L2 group? Are you not allowed to? Are you kept socially separate? Or are you allowed to or is it is the traffic both ways and so on and so forth. All of these will be decided by the historical factors of that particular region. That is at a local level, local as in let us say national level. Now, if you go globally, conquest and empire building also have caused transfer of various languages as L2 to a number of nations. So, throughout history we have seen one country conquering another, as a result of which that language becomes the official language of that place and so on. So, for example, French as L2 was brought in through the Norman conquest. On the other hand, we have colonialism, long history of colonialism, western colonialism, where English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, these were transported as L2 to the erstwhile colonies. So, large number of nations speak L2, English as L2 like us. Similarly, many countries in the African continent speak French as L2 and so on. So, these are some of the cases globally. Another important social variable is the idea that surrounds the idea of identity, identities and boundaries. So, depending on what kind of identity you create based on all these historical facts that you have already seen. So, there are identities that are created and language is one of the very important hallmarks of social identity of a group. So, nations are sometimes built on linguistic identities or at least sometimes national identity will be reinforced using language. So, for example, let us say US, let us take the example of US again. US has English as the official language. So, this kind of reinforces the identity of the nation. That is not how India is, we have many hundreds of languages. So, there are, but then within that we have regional identities. So, every state has its own. So, that is how it can play out. The interesting aspect of linguistic identity is that it both unifies and excludes at the same time. So, for example, if you use language as an identity marker, so immediately you are creating a group identity at the same time excluding the out group. Whoever does not speak your language. So, for example, Hebrew in Israel, Hebrew is the official language of Israel, that is their ancient language. So, when you are a Hebrew speaker or not Hebrew speaker, that will create a boundary between. So, once you have an identity marker, you also it can also be used as a boundary marker. So, identities and boundaries go always together. Similarly, Tok Pisin in Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is a very interesting case where large number of languages are spoken in a very small geographical area, and however, none of the local languages is a official language. Tok Pisin, which is actually a pidgin, which is now a Creole, that is the official language. So, these kind of factors tell us a lot about the situation, the linguistic identities, the interrelationship between languages a lot. On the other hand, Mongol conquerors of China did not give access, did not make access, make their language accessible to the Chinese. This is also possible. So, on the one hand we have for example, if you take the case of Tok Pisin was brought in because of the again colonization. So, English was brought in and then the Creole was created out of it, and as a result of which what we have today. On the other hand, this is also possible that the conquerors may not make their language accessible to the local people, thus keeping the boundary intact. Hence, learning a different language also often means crossing a boundary. If there are boundaries like this, learning a language means crossing that boundary. Now, crossing a boundary, what does that mean? It does not simply mean that you are learning a language, it often means it also translates into crossing the cultural boundaries. So, once you learn, let us say I start learning Telugu tomorrow, I also will be crossing over to or starting to learn the Telugu culture, because language is an integral part of the culture. So, if you truly want to participate in another language, you need to learn the culture of that language. What does culture mean? Basically, it means the value system, the social norms, the behavior pattern, and all of that thing. So, language is not an isolated factor, it brings along with it the history of that community and whatever the codified norms are. So, in this case, this is where the acculturation model comes into play. This is a well known model, pretty old, but makes sense. So, this in terms of we are talking about SLA. So, in terms of SLA, this idea of learning another language, translating into learning another culture has been incorporated into this model called the acculturation model. In case of SLA, this might affect, there might be some negative effect of that. So, for example, these are the factors that the model talks about: dominance, segregation between groups, willingness or lack thereof of the community to preserve its own lifestyle or community practices, and so on. Hence, one can live side by side another community and never learn their language, or learning very little. If one of these, so if the dominance results into segregation, then you may not learn the other person's language at all. But if there is a kind of a level playing field and there is no segregation, the people are moving freely between communities, then you will learn the language. So, these are very important social factors to keep in mind. They may not be always very apparent, but you need to watch. Another important factor is the institutional forces. Institution as in the various kinds of social institutes that regulate, organize and regulate the social life of a people. For example, the education policy, language policy and so on. Language policy decides the medium of education, legal language, media and so on and so forth. Hence, a lot depends on the language policies or any policy that affects language a lot. So, depending on the language policy adopted by a nation, SLA will be either encouraged or discouraged. So, for official language speakers, there is no need to learn L2. So, if you are an Assamese speaker in Assam, there is no problem. You do not need to learn another language. Learning and knowing Assamese is good enough for you. But for the minority language speakers, it is imperative to learn the official language, which is their L2. So, all the non-Assamese speakers will need to learn L2. So, there is an encouragement to learn the official language. Now, this might adversely affect the L1 health, because over a period of time L1 might just disappear. Then there are social categories. Every society has its own categories like groups based on education, employment, gender, class and so on, depending on the country, depending on the place you are situated. And these determine the experiences they have, and depending on the whatever are the kind of experiences that you have, and also what kind of experience is expected of you, what is it, what are you supposed to behave like. So, depending on let us say highly educated person will need to behave and talk in a particular way, that is not the case with everybody else. Similarly, depending on whatever is an important variable in a given society, there are different expectation levels for different groups of people. Now, in terms of SLA, different groups learning reality may be different. So, dependent on who is your immediate friend group, what is the group that you are surrounded with, or where are you learning the language. If it is a social learning, this will be very important as a variable, and as a result this will also impact the learning outcome. Now, these are the major social macro social variables. Now, we will move on to the micro social variables, micro social aspects of SLA. So, one of them is of course, the variation in language. For example, many studies have focused on various kinds of inflection, for example, the ing versus in the spoken variety of English in many places in US for example. So, depending on who is speaking, this might be different, how you pronounce this entire word, whether you pronounce it as a wheeler or not, depends on many factors. One of them could be speaker variation. So, who is speaking depends on that. There could also be linguistic factors. For example, in some cases this might appear before a word which begins with a back consonant or before a pause. On the other hand, only the n sound might appear before a front consonant. So, these are various micro level differences that one needs to understand. On the other hand, you have formal versus informal conversation. So, often in informal conversation, this is grammar might be a little compromised. So, it is possible to omit certain parts, like this is a beautiful garden. In some cases, the is might be just omitted, this is a beautiful garden. Of late, we have noticed that the preposition in US English is also now not often pronounced. So, out the door is fine, not out of the door or out of the window. So, these things are also important. So, is it because of the formal versus informal difference, or is it slowly becoming a part of the formal speech as well? These are very small minute details that might also affect the second language acquisition. Now, not all variations are in the outside in the world like macro and micro, but sometimes the variation might be within the speaker as well. So, that needs to be also taken into account. We have talked about this in while discussing complexity theory, but we need to keep in mind that the macro and micro social elements work together with the internal variation of the speaker. An interesting theory in this domain is that of accommodation theory. Accommodation theory is basically talks about when the speaker tries to approximate to the hearer's language. So, if I am a native speaker of a language which I am teaching somebody as L2, I will try to accommodate my hearer's level of knowledge. So, how I will accommodate? I will simplify the language. So, even if I am a native speaker, I know all the complex structures and I use them as well in my day to day language use. But what I will do is, because I know the other person is a learner, is not yet a proficient speaker of the language, I will try to accommodate that other person in the conversation in order to help him or her learn. So, accommodation, how does it happen? It is because it happens through simplification. So, the L2 native speaker tries to simplify the language in order to help the other person learn the language. Another micro-social factor is gender, which has often been studied within socio-linguistics, specifically in socio-phonetics as well. The reason being, across different groups in the world, it has been noticed that women tend to speak the formal variety or the more pure variety of a language as opposed to the male counterparts. Often it has been studied in many countries, in fact, many societies as well, because for various reasons. One could be because in the old times when women did not go out very often, they used to be at home. So, they were not exposed to the various changes that the world outside was going through. For example, the working men will have a different kind of talking. the women of the same class, but if they are not outside, if they are sitting at home, then they will not be exposed to the working language, the working men's language. So, they will still speak the more pure form, and there are many shades to this domain of study. It is actually quite an interesting, you might want to look up. So, but typically it will be more, women tend to speak more the more pure form, and the more in absence of a better term, let us say better way of speaking, they will be more formal. As a result of which, this might also have an impact on the SLA learners. For example, a very interesting study on Vietnamese and Cambodian immigrants in Washington DC area was carried out, and what they found was that men tend to use more of IN instead of ING, as we just saw. This is one place where the variation was seen. So, men use more of IN, but women tend to use more of ING, the actual form. Because women use the more prestigious form. So, the learners also learn that, because the native women use ING, the immigrant women also used ING, because they were looking up to the women and the men looking up to the men. So, as a result of which, even immigrants learned it the way native speaker difference was carried out in this kind of a format. Then we have this prestige and hierarchy of L1, L2. So, relative prestige we have already seen that the L1 and L2 this idea is entirely in the social domain, dependent on the historical facts and the opportunities and so on and so forth. But these impact the use of certain subtle cues in the speech in both L1 and L2 speakers and learners. So, depending on the how the macro social factors are, it will affect the way L1 and L2 is spoken. Right. So, if L2 is more prestigious or powerful than L1, which is the case when due to the language policies or whatever, when it is more powerful than L1, then the learner tries to approximate to the L2 native language features consciously. For example, again let us say if I am trying to learn a language, learn Hindi for example. Hindi is one of the official languages. So, if I am trying to learn Hindi because it is more prestigious than my language, has more opportunities and so on, I will try to speak Hindi in a proper way, because it makes it will be important for me. On the other hand, if L1 is more prestigious than L2, so if I am a Hindi speaker and I need to learn L2 for other purposes, for example, for job I have been posted in a place, new place which does not speak my language. So, I need to learn the language of that place, but it is not really, I am a Hindi speaker and that language is obviously, let us say it is a smaller language. So, I do not need to learn. In that case, what will happen is the more features of L1 will be transferred to L2, because the hierarchy. So, these are very subtle micro level changes that will happen in case of SLA, which is based on the macro social factors of the mutual respect and the status. For tutored environment, because SLA is learned in two different kinds of environment, tutored versus informal. So, for tutored environment, the concept of foreigner's talk is also an important one. This is again the same thing like the accommodation theory, where the L2 native speakers they simplify. For example, this is not only in case of informal case, but also in tutored. One particular study that was carried out, the teacher says, "Mommy, look at your work." So, this is they are deleting the does mommy look at your work, like this should have been the language. Similarly, so native English, this is a case of native English speaker teaching L2 learning children. Then you have Indians in Korea. So, the do is missing, the auxiliary, because probably the teacher realizes that this auxiliary function might be difficult for the L2 learners, hence they are deleting it. So, this happens in both the social domain through accommodation, and it also happens in the tutored environment, which is called the foreigner's talk. Simplification, we might follow these rules. So, this is for example, simple vocabulary, long pauses, slow rate of speech, careful pronunciation, so on and so forth. This has been found through empirical research. This simplification has been found to be useful for adult SLA learners, but not for the children. For children, it was not very effective. So, this kind of factors have been also looked at into child SLA research. What many parameters have been studied, but most importantly patterns of interaction, interactional characteristics like turn taking, then self evaluations. These are factors that will be reflecting the macro and the micro social features, and hence these have been used as variables in research, in empirical research. For example, in one particular case study carried out by the group of scholars, they were looking at Chinese EFL learners. EFL is English as foreign language. So, Chinese L1 speakers learning English as foreign language, and the groups that they studied was 4th grade and 6th grade, and the method was task based interaction. So, what they showed was that 4th graders showed less engagement. Their patterns of interactions were not stable across tasks. In contrast, the 6th graders interacted with a high degree of mutuality, meaning collaborative patterns. So, they were discussing with the teachers, and there was it was a collaboration rather than a one way traffic sort of thing, and they also showed greater engagement with extended topic sequences and so on and so forth. So, these are certain things. There are many other studies like this, but this is one. So, within the same community of L1, both Chinese, both are learning English as foreign language. So, the pattern also is fixed. This is when it is foreign language, it will be a tutored environment. So, that is also fixed, but even within that small group, 4th and 6th graders, they found some very subtle differences based on their age. Then we have informal versus formal learning within this domain. This is another crucial factor, because depending on the pattern of learning, if you are either learning the language in a social setup versus in a tutored setup, there will be some very interesting differences. So, in case of let us say informal learning happens typically in a multilingual society. So, let us say you have around you speakers of many other languages. So, society is multilingual. The speaker learners own friends are multilingual, and or your lifestyle involves lot of travel. These are scenarios where L2 learning will be informal, because you are mingling with a lot of people who speak other languages. And on the other hand, formal learning will take place in the classroom setting. So, English for example learned through school, when in the beginning, in the initial stages of school, English will be taught as a second language, but it is not often a part of your social surroundings. So, you do not find it in your neighborhood, you do not find it among your friend circles, and so on and so forth. So, as a result of which the learning here will be formal. What does formal mean? For our purposes, it means it has a standardized format. The teaching method will be the learning has a properly particular standardized format with curated teaching materials. So, it is very it has a one particular way of giving the materials. So, unlike social learning there is no method. Somebody might pick up the, depending on your circle, depending on the people you are mingling with, you will pick up one aspect or the other. But in a formal setup, there is always a similar kind of pattern that is given to all the different kinds of students. Irrespective of who you are, the teaching method remains the same, depending on what. So, many studies have taken place on the comparison between formal versus informal learning. For example, in this particular study on Greek English bilinguals showed that the naturalistic or classroom exposure was compared, and they found that naturalistic learners were indeed processing intermediate traces like native speaker. This is a complex grammatical process, syntactic process. The naturalistic learners were doing better in that rather than compared to the tutored environment students. Another crucial similarity, another crucial aspect of language learning, second language learning, similar to second language learning, is what we call foreign language learning. So, this is English, for example, English, so you have ESL and EFL, English as second language, English as foreign language, both can be taught in the same environment. So, within India also you can learn English as second language, which most of us do, but English as foreign language is also a possibility. So, what happens when you learn a language as foreign language versus a language as a second language? The most crucial difference will be when you are learning it as a FL, as a foreign language, it is not there in your environment. So, the only place where you are exposed to the language is in the classroom. So, there is no way for you to pick up, so to say, like layman terminology is picking up a language. So, you cannot pick up bits and pieces here and there, you will learn it in a particular format. But the same language, if it is taught as a second language, it is understood that the language will be around you somewhere in the in your day to day life. So, this is where one of the most important variation occurs, and of course, for foreign language teaching will have some particular format again. Just like tutored second language learning, foreign language learning also has its own formatting. So, foreign language setting for children who learn L2 learning at different ages have shown that this is some of the results, that after the same hours of instruction, like late beginners showed advantage over those who started earlier. So, people who started learning foreign language later were doing better than the early learners. The reason that they have put forward, the researchers have put forward, is the amount of input and practice that FL learning paradigm utilizes probably is the reason why the outcome was different. So, the quality of input and not age seems a factor in FL learning. This is just one example how ESL how a foreign language and second language learning might be different with different kinds of outcome, because foreign language teaching will be often, because there is no social input, the instruction also takes care of that factor, as a result of which different kinds of results will be seen. So, differential strategies have been utilized for foreign language teaching condition, for example, content based instruction, theme based language teaching and CLIL. There are number of different methodologies that have been used. So, content based teaching mainly involve teaching grammatical categories. This is not very popular now, but this used to be very popular at one point of time, but over a period of time theme based teaching have become more popular, and as of now CLIL is one of the most popular method of teaching foreign language. This is very interesting and this is very different from the rest, because in CLIL what happens is educational approach, here the curricular content is taught through the medium of a foreign language. So, it is not only a language teaching, but you are using the foreign language to teach the other subjects as well. So, let us say you are taught French through French, not only in French class, but also in economics class or in the science classes, like that. So, in schools you are kind of immersing the students in a foreign language environment by teaching all subjects through CLIL. That is the important factor about CLIL. So, the definition is an educational approach where curricular content is taught through the medium of a foreign language, typically to students participating in some form of mainstream education at the primary, secondary and tertiary level. So, this is one of the most popular types today. As more and more schools are adopting CLIL method in many European countries. So, this also has become a very important domain of research of late. Typically, they try to figure out whether how the CLIL methods is different or similar to other kind of language teaching method, and there are of course the same kind of variables will be used. For example, the negotiation strategies and what kind of methodology that the learners typically use. So, also there are more, one important factor about CLIL is that because you are using the language to teach other subjects as well. So, the amount of instruction that the child receives is far more compared to a typically language teaching class. So, that also has a very important impact on the way the language will be finally learned. So, this is one. Another method of teaching another language is second language, foreign language, whatever, is the immersion method. So, immersion method is rather old, it is not any new method. Here what happens, usually a local language is taught, not a foreign language, but a local language is taught. Teachers are often bilingual. Typically in CLIL, however, that is not always the case. Teachers may not be bilingual. Teachers might be the native speaker of the foreign language that the other children are learning as FL, foreign language. And the starting age in immersion setting is usually earlier than for CLIL. So, typically what happens, often we have seen this immersion method in case of teaching the native languages, indigenous language, or we have also seen this working out in Canada, for example. So, the French immersion program or English immersion program for the French speakers and so on. So, this is another method where everything, all kinds of teaching and other activities take place in that language, the immersion language. So, if you are learning French, your entire day's activity in the school will be through French, classes, other activities and so on. So, this typically concern the types of input feedback that maximize opportunities for the L2 development, and as a result of which learners developed their metalinguistic awareness and produced more target like language. So, immersion program has also been very popular and very useful for teaching languages, because you are immersing the learners into the language environment. So, it is not only the classroom teaching, but you are trying to give them more lifelike experience, and hence the outcome has also been pretty good. Immersion program also has its own variations across different countries and different cultures, and as a result of which you have different kinds of outcomes, primarily based on the characteristics of the learners, the instructional context and so on and so forth. So, to sum up, learning a second language needs to take into account a number of social variables. All these variables also interact with each other, and as a result of which you have different outcomes. So, some variables might be more useful for one context, while some others might be for another context, and the way they interact also may not be similar across all cultures. So, this is a very complex social phenomena like all other social phenomena. So, this is and as a result of which this will impact the final outcome. Final outcome in second language acquisition is what we call as ultimate attainment, UA. So, based on all of these factors. Now, because of this kind of complex, interconnected, interrelated features, second language teaching also is a very important domain, established domain that takes into account all of these multitude of factors, and then they create teaching material, methods and strategies for better outcomes. So, second language acquisition, when we talk about second language acquisition, I need to mention that second language teaching is also a very established domain that actually takes into account all of these factors that we have discussed and many others that we could not due to paucity of time. Anyway, this is where we sum up the first lecture. In the following lectures, we will look at some features of the childhood bilingualism and adult bilingualism. Thank you.